to this session. As you can see from the program, the meeting room has opened, and in a few minutes, we will be starting. Immediately after now, we will take a remarks and, of course, setting the tone from the chairman of the chapter, Mrs. Celine Okoroma Vincent. Immediately afterwards, our very first speaker will come on board. I will be introducing her at that time, and she'll be dealing on the topic, understanding the role of the company secretary in regulatory compliance, with the subtopic, key regulations and practical tips for timely compliance. We expect that we will take questions and answers immediately after our presentation to keep it fresh and also to save time. Afterwards, the second speaker will be taking us on the subtopic, tools and methods to successfully structure and manage an effective compliance program. Again, we will also take questions and answers immediately after his presentation. We will take a vote of thanks and then a couple of announcements, and then we close. So that's it's in a nutshell our program for today, and we expect that this should be completed in about 3 hours from now. So once more, I would like to thank all participants who have joined, and those, and as we expect more people to join up. And we most especially welcome our speakers for finding time to do us this honor. Welcome our speakers. I will be introducing you shortly. Before we make the introductions, I would like to take this opportunity to speak a bit about ICSAN. I'm sure a lot of you are quite familiar with the Institute, but for the purpose of our program and for those who have joined us for the first time, the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators is a leading recognized professional body in Nigeria dedicated to enhancing the status and practice of governance and public administration. ICSAN represents the global voice on governance and regulatory issues in the private, public, and not-for-public sectors. Working in conjunction with governmental and other statutory bodies, ICSAN promotes best practice and offers advice and guidance on good governance in corporate organizations. ICSAN renders consulting services to the society, especially in the corporate community, through seminars, workshops, board evaluations, and training, such as what we're having today, thereby increasing broad-based knowledge, raising awareness on business, company, law, corporate governance, management, finance, administration, and other aspects that engender compliance, corporate growth, and sustainability. The Institute is a member of the Corporate Secretaries International Association, CSIA, a Geneva-registered global organization dedicated to developing and growing the study and practice of secretaryship to improve professional standards, the quality of governance practice, and to improve organizational performance. ICSAN is a fantastic organization to associate with, and we are happy that we have our participants and our speakers who have come to do justice to today's event. So welcome once again. So without wasting another minute, I would like to, if you permit me, to welcome the chapter chairman, Mrs. Celine Okoroma Vincent, ACIS, to give us welcome remarks and set the tone for today's training. Madam Chairman, you're welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Sebastian, for that very warm introduction and also giving us brief information about the Institute. Let me start by welcoming everyone. Good afternoon, dear participants. My name is Celine Okoroma Vincent. I'm an associate member of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria. And by the grace of God, I currently serve as the chairman of the Rivers State chapter. It's such a pleasure to be able to see every one of you. Hello, Larry. Hi, Precious. I've also seen Mrs. Helen Ovolen, Mr. Eni. These are all members of our team, and also within the chapter externally, I also see Laura. It's such a pleasure to have you all on board. Thank you for joining us today. So today is, I'm delighted as a matter of fact to have you all because you see for the past 2 years as a chapter, we had been building capacity in terms of training. And since 2020 to about 2021, we've actually been delivering free trainings to our chapter members and members of the public, generally to enlighten members of the public about corporate governance, the Institute, and also generally build capacity and position the chapter as a knowledge transfer and a thought leader within our sector in the corporate governance landscape. Since this year, we decided that it is time to go premium with our service, particularly since 2020 to 2021, we actually served a total number of 445 attendees, participants who benefited from our freemium virtual trainings in the course of 2020 to 2021. So it's like a historic event for us today, particularly since it's the first time we are charging a fee for our trainings. If you go to our YouTube channel, the trainings that we've had in the course of the period in review are available for free, and then you can go by and learn. We've also taken topics on accounting, corporate governance, and even HR. So we try as much as possible to have a very rich scope of learning for our chapter members and also external members. So today it's very special for us, particularly because we are having a very interesting topic. The topic may sound very simple, but it's weighty, not only in application, but also in its content, because we'll not just learn about who a company secretary is, we'll also delve into the role of a company secretary within an organization, particularly the role of company secretary as it relates to regulatory compliance. And because we went premium on this particular training, we went in search of the best for facilitators. They will be introduced to you by our moderator, Mr. Sebastian Essien. Mr. Uko and Mrs. Adetola Adeleye Fasoro are very experienced. You're not going to be hearing theory. You're going to be listening to who that are industry practitioners with a very large depth of knowledge in the scope they're going to bring in out today. So I would advise you, get a pen, get a booklet, write down all the nuggets so that in the course of the training and even after the training, you can ask questions. And also I would encourage people to share the information that you learned from this training on your social media. You can tag us. We are on social media at ICSANRivers chapter across all platforms, our YouTube handles, as in Twitter, even Instagram and Facebook is quite active. So you can follow us on there and share some of the nuggets you'll be getting out of this training. So without much ado, I want to thank you all for coming, and I hope that you would be coming for other previous trainings, because as you can see, this is Q2. We actually have a plan to have another training in Q3 and in Q4, and a physical training also in the course of the year. So thank you very much. I wish you a very successful training and deliberations, and please try as much as possible, ask questions, and ensure that you make full benefit of the amount that you've paid for this training. So on this very note, I would hand over to the moderator so that we can start the deliberation in earnest. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, for that very, for your welcome address and setting the tone for this event. Without much ado, I would like to invite our speaker for session 1, who will be taking us on the sub-theme, key regulations and practical tips for timely compliance. Our speaker for session 1 is no other than Mrs. Adetola Adeleye Fasoro. Mrs. Adetola Fasoro leads the legal compliance and company secretarial team of First Ally Capital Limited. She advises all its subsidiaries, ensuring full legal and regulatory compliance with all relevant laws, amongst others. She's an experienced legal practitioner with expertise in corporate and commercial law and more. Prior to joining First Ally, she worked in the legal, company secretarial and compliance department of United Capital PLC. She holds an LLB honors from Obafemi Awolowo University with awards for excellence in 2011. She was called to the Nigerian bar in 2012 and obtained an LLM in law from the University of Pennsylvania Law School in 2016, where she was a Dean Scholar and recipient of the Trustees Council of Penn Women's Scholarship. She's a member of the Corporate Counsel Committee of the Section of Business Law of the Nigerian Bar Association. My dear friends, participants, please join as we welcome Mrs. Adetola Adeleye Fashero. You're welcome, madam.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sebastian. Good afternoon, everyone. Just to confirm, you can all hear me loud and clear, and my video is clear. Thank you to the Rivers chapter of ICSAN for inviting me to this knowledge sharing session. I'm calling it knowledge sharing because I expect that I'm also going to learn from my colleagues that are on this platform. Thank you to the chairman of the Rivers State chapter of ICSAN, and of course to my senior colleague, Mr. Oku, who I'm meeting for the first time. I'm just looking forward to your session, and I'm sure I'll be able to glean a lot from your wealth of wisdom and experience in this market as well. So what I'm going to do now is to share my screen so we can get right into this. As we progress, please, if you have questions, feel free to drop in the chat box. And towards the end, we can collate everything and take the Q&A in an orderly manner. Thank you very much for having me once again. Okay, so my screen is up now, I believe. Mr. Sebastian, you can just confirm that my screen is up.
Yes, I can see. So I think it's you're good to go.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's dive right into it. The topic before us today is understanding the role of the company secretary in regulatory compliance, key regulations, and practical tips for timely compliance. As the chairman earlier said, what we're going to do this afternoon is basically look at practical tips. I assume that a lot of us were aware what our role as company secretaries, of course, but we'll look at practical tips that we can employ for us to navigate our role as company secretary in the regulatory compliance space. So in terms of the session outline, we're going to look at the concept of compliance, drivers of compliance, role of company secretary in regulatory compliance, which is where we have subsets as highlighted on the screen, and of course, practical tips for timely compliance and summary. And let me declare upfront that I have like freebies for this session. At the end of the session, I'm going to share with the chapter free compliance template that I use currently in my organization, and of course, compliance reports that I use in my organization, which I believe can be socialized and shared with members of the chapter. So going to my first slide is to go through concept of compliance, and I'm sure the picture here on the screen set the tone as to what compliance is. We have regulations, we have standards, we have policies, rules, requirements, and laws. And basically compliance and the keywords are what I have highlighted here in red, set of action, of course, that an organization needs to undertake to comply with, of course, the letter and spirit of law or regulation. And compliance is basically the laws and regulation that governs you as a business activity. And I'm going to put it into two buckets. You are complying maybe with external rules and regulations that guide your business, or you are also complying with internal policies and procedures set down by your own business to guide your business. So it can be internal, and as well it can be external for rules and regulation that you are complying with. Now, looking at regulatory compliance, this is an organization's adherence to laws, regulations, guidelines, circulars, everything that your regulator basically have released or have issued that is relevant to your business processes. They have to be things that are relevant to your business processes. So the concept of compliance, which I believe is not strange to all of us here on this call, is basically a set of actions that you as an organization need to comply with, and it can be both internal and external. Now, when it is external, you're talking about your regulators, and when it is internal, you're talking about the policies and procedures that you have set down as a business to guide your own business. Now, moving on to the next slide, I have here drivers of compliance. And let me quickly drop just a slide joke here that I was trying to get the color of taxi in Rivers State, so I will not be using the yellow taxi driver here. Just, that is an aside. So maybe at the end of this training, you'll be able to tell me the right color so I can put it there when I'm sending this slide to the chapter. Now, looking at the drivers of compliance, we have just 4 things I've highlighted here as the key drivers. You have people, you need good, skilled, and trained people. I know a lot of us here that are managers of people will complain about, oh, my team members are not trained, they are not experienced, they are not exposed. And the question I ask is, are they trained? I mean, your team members, they're as good as what they know. And you should ask yourself, are they trained? Are you trained to perform this role? So key driver of compliance is people, that's number 1. It's not even in Excel sheets, it's not even in a software. Number 1 is people, because it is the people that will operate that software that you have. It is people that will populate that Excel sheet that you have. So you need good, skilled, and trained people. Very important as a key driver of compliance. The next is processes. You need to have laid down documented processes. Yes, how do we do this? How do we render this file? Is it documented somewhere so that even when you are on leave, if you have team members, they can continue from where you stop, and the whole organization or your whole department is not like they can't function if you are not in. That is if you have team members. However, if you're alone, if you run your department alone, if you're a company secretary that you are just alone, you have laid down documented processes that this is how I'm going to run the company secretarial department. So laid down documented processes is also very, very key and important. Now, the next key driver of compliance is systems. And for system, what you need basically is functional and reliable software. You don't need to go to the United States and go and look for maybe sophisticated software, start paying in dollars. You can start with as basic as Microsoft Word. And I'm going to share my own compliance calendar that I use and I've been in use for the past 3 years. It's simply on Microsoft Word, and you can also populate it on Microsoft Excel. But as the organization scale, if you're a PLC, you are listed on the exchange, you have different subsidiaries. For example, you have 8 subsidiaries and it's large. Of course, you can begin to think of software that are sophisticated and you can pay for. But look at the word here, functional. You need something that is functional and is reliable. It's functional and it's reliable for you to start. So that's number 3 for drivers of compliance. And number 4, which is very crucial, and this one sometimes it can be out of your control, is externalities. And the first point there is regulators. They are very key. Regulatory compliance, of course, your regulators, your external auditors, and of course, industry or sector standard, depending on the industry or the sector that you play into. So those are the externalities that affect you as a company secretary in the regulatory compliance space. So just to go over this very quickly, we have people, processes, systems, and externalities. Again, on people, you need to have good, skilled, and trained people. People that are trained, they need to be trained to know how to deliver on the job. You yourself, you need to be trained to know how to deliver on the job. Of course, processes have to be laid down, documented properly. Systems, the emphasis is not on big gadgets or maybe big softwares, just have something that is functional and of course reliable, and of course the externalities, which sometimes may be out of your control. But we are going to go into how you can navigate this space very carefully. Now, moving to the next slide, why comply? I believe for every one of us here, you'll be asking yourself why comply. I'm sure we all know why we should comply. Number 1, it is the law. Most of these compliance requirements that we have, especially in terms of external requirements, it is the law, it's documented somewhere, and there's usually penalties for non-compliance. As we will see as we progress, you will see that yes, there's penalties for non-compliance. And because it is the law, it is compulsory that you should comply with these rules and regulations that guide your business. The third point as to why you should comply is that it reduces business and reputational risk. You don't want to see your name in the pages of the newspaper on business day, on the Nation Guardian or anything to say, oh, XYZ Limited is not complying with this and is flouting this and all that. Another risk is when you have a taxman. I don't know if you have them there in Rivers State when they just put sealed by the order of the Lagos State Inland Revenue Service, LIRS, or any other service like that. So it reduces business and reputational risk, and if you comply. The next point is it provides competitive advantage. And I'm sure someone might be asking, how does compliance provide competitive advantage? Take, for example, if you're looking into mergers and acquisition and your counterparty is conducting like a due diligence of your company and they see that, oh, this company is actually compliant. When they get to the DD part on regulatory compliance and they see that you have all your licenses in place, you have your permits in place, you file your returns as and when due. I mean, if it's like a bid process or an auction process, your organization, of course, will be rated top and it provides you a competitive advantage. You also secure a seat at the table. That's similar to what I just mentioned. The next point as to why we should comply is that it increases client confidence in internal control, because clients are confident that, oh, this organization that I put money into, or this organization that I deal with, or their processes and their structures is tight, and I am confident that they know what they are doing. The next point is that it prevents or avoid audit exceptions throughout the year. And this audit exception does not necessarily have to be external audit exceptions. You can also be internal audit exceptions, that when things that has to do with regulatory compliance, as it concerns you as a company secretary comes up, they are sure that there will be no exception at all. When it comes to your own part of the work, there is no exception. Next point, of course, is increases investor confidence. They are confident that, oh, they can do business with you, they can put money in your business, and that is very good for your business as well. The last 2 points, and I'll take them together, is profitability and revenue protection. Now, where I currently work, when someone asks me, oh, this legal department, what does legal do? And I'm sure as lawyers, we've heard that, what do you do, sir? Lawyers, you people, you don't bring money into the business, you only take away. I'm very proud to tell them that, well, I may not be bringing money into the business, so to speak, but one thing I ensure is that I protect revenue. And that is why I always say that I lead the legal, compliance, and company secretarial team at First Ally, and that department is also known as the Department of Revenue Protection. Well, what do I mean by saying is Department of Revenue Protection? Yes, we may not be bringing naira and kobo in, but we ensure that even the revenue that we have is safeguarded, is not eroded by penalties and sanctions. Take, for example, if at the end of the year, hypothetical case, you made like 10 million, and because you failed to file annual returns, or because you failed to file something with the SEC as and when due, you are now penalized 11 million. The entire profit that you are looking to share with maybe members of staff as performance bonus has been eroded. And by that erosion, I mean, there's no profitability in the business. So as a company secretary and as one with the responsibility for regulatory compliance, you are in charge of ensuring profitability by revenue protection. You are protecting the revenue that the organization has made, and that's an integral part and an integral department in an organization's business. And we should try as much as possible to always project that. We should not see ourselves as cost centers. We protect revenue as well. So these are some of the reasons why we should comply. I believe we're all familiar with this. And in case someone is asking us this question, we can tell them we should comply because it is the law and compulsory. You reduce reputational risk, you provide competitive edge, you have a seat at the table, you increase client confidence, you avoid audit exception, and of course, you increase your investor confidence, and very importantly, you protect revenue from erosion. All right, now let's just quickly look at concepts of corporate governance. I'm going to tie this together as we progress. And basically, I assume again, every one of us here, we're familiar. And I'm just going to go with this definition as shared by the International Finance Corporation, that is IFC. And basically what is CG? Corporate governance is basically your structure and process by which your organization is directed and controlled. So, and for corporate governance, we focus on quite a number of things: how your company resolve their issues and make decisions, the involvement, contribution, and communication between management, shareholders, and workers, the ways in which rights and responsibilities, of course, they are shared between the company's workers, management, and shareholders, policies and procedures for decision-making on company affairs, checks and balances that you've put in place to eliminate fraud or abuse of office, policies that you've also put in place to reduce or eliminate principal agent problems, and of course, the relationship between the company and its shareholders. So these are basically the general key points or the concept of corporate governance. So I just felt to throw that in because there's going to be like a slide that talks about regulatory compliance and this corporate governance bit. Now, the key principles of corporate governance, so I'm sure we're all aware we have several principles. So what I've done is to summarize everything into 4. And these 4 will just serve as a guide. The first is accountability. And of course, as an organization, basically refers to obligation and responsibility for you to give an explanation or reason for the company's actions and conduct. Then the next point is on transparency. I mean, you have openness and willingness by the company to provide clear information to shareholders and of course, other stakeholders in an organization. Then there's fairness, that is equal treatment of all shareholders. And let me also add stakeholders. Then there's responsibility. Of course, that is handled by the board of directors. They have the given authority to act on behalf of the company. And because of that, they need to accept full responsibility for the powers that is given and the authority that it exercises. So these are just the key principles of corporate governance. And like I said, I've summarized them into 4: accountability, transparency, fairness, and of course, responsibility. All right, now looking at relevant regulators and legislations, and this is us moving now into the heart of today's training and knowledge sharing session, as I've called it. Now, for relevant regulators and legislation, as a company secretary, my key point here is that it depends on the sector and the industries where you play, and is also subject to the peculiarities of industry. But the ones that I know is key, and that's why I have them top most, is the Corporate Affairs Commission, and of course the Enabling Act is now the CAMA 2020, previously 2004, but we've had significant changes with the CAMA 2020 that we now have in place. And of course we have the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria. I know there will be arguments as to, okay, this FRCN covers some companies and it doesn't cover some others. We will get into that as we move along as well. Now, on relevant regulator, it depends on the sector where you play in. And the ones that I have here, which is the sector where I currently play in, I'm going to ask us to drop something in the question, in the chat box shortly. We have the CBN, of course, which is for the banks. We have NICOM, which is for insurance. We have the SEC, which is basically for the capital market and your public companies. And of course, we have PENCOM, which is for PFAs and PSCs. That's the pension fund administrators, and of course, the pension fund custodians. So this is just talking about capital. This is just talking about financial services. And financial services is very wide. There's now a new entrant to the financial services. And that is where you have the interplay with technology, which is, of course, fintech. So if I can just take a pause, just to have a feel, as company secretaries on this call, can I just see us put in the chat box the sector where we play in, the industry where we play in? So I'll just give about 30 seconds to 60 seconds for us to put in our in the chat box the sector where we play in. If you can just go ahead and do that, please. Thank you. I just want to have a feel. Okay, energy services. That is looking like DPR, Department of Petroleum Resources. Okay. Finance industry, financial services. Okay. And now for financial services, if you can be specific, is it CBN, is it SEC, is it NICOM, is it PENCOM? I'm sure it has to be one of those 4. So if you say financial services, is it the financial markets, is it capital markets, Okay, I see someone from power sector here. Okay, thank you for sharing. Okay. Finance, energy. Okay, just waiting for more people to share. Okay, I guess it's taking time for people to share. Okay, I just wanted to have a feel of the sector where everyone on the call currently. Okay, so I'll just take it that most of us on this call, we play in the financial services space. And like I said, financial services is actually very broad. I wanted to have a feel of the specific subsector where we play in. So I guess for this purpose, I will assume we're all from financial services, and we also have one or two of our brothers or sisters from energy and of course power. So like I said, we have CAC, FRCN, and of course in the financial service space, we have CBN, we have NICOM, we have SEC, and of course we have PENCOM. Now, so for regulators, it depends on your sector, and of course, it's also subject to the peculiarities of industry. Now, on my next slide, I talk about the relevant legislation. Now, as it relates to company secretary, and next slide, we also talk about that the NCCG code 2008 is now the overriding code. Again, this is subject to the peculiarities of industry sector codes. Now, looking at relevant legislation that affect the business, depending on the industry, and maybe case in point for the purpose of this session, we are looking at financial service sector. And what I have here is that financial service sector is heavily regulated, and that is where you have your FIs and CMOs, and that's your financial institutions and capital market operators. And the reason why it is heavily regulated is because the integrity of the financial and capital markets is largely dependent on the level of regulatory compliance. And the reason why you have that is because finance is at the heart of the economy, and that is why that space is heavily regulated. I think in the financial service space, if I can speak on this, one of the subsector that I know is heavily regulated will be the PENCOM, and because this is where you have people's funds for retirement, and because of the experience in the past, the regulator in that space, that is PENCOM, they've taken that responsibility on board properly. Now, depending on your industry, the following are some of the laws we have to comply with, and I have them here in abbreviation, but I'm sure we can make sense of some of them, especially the ones that I have highlighted. So you have your CAMA 2020, and of course you have the NCCG code, again, depending on if your organization is a public interest entity, that is an organization that submits returns to other regulators apart from the CAC and of course the FIRS. Now, some of the laws that you also have here, you have your ISA, which is the Investment and Securities Act, you have FRC Act, you have things around VAT, you have stamp duties, NOTAP, Forex, CBN, secular, circles, personal income tax, employee tax, education, things around Pension Reforms Act 2014, the NSE rule book, the SEC MLCFT regulations, which by the way is being reviewed by the commission and is awaiting assent of the minister. That of the CBN was released to the markets, I believe, about 2 days ago. And then you have CETA, you have ITF, DD members rule. Again, this is not exhaustive at all. Depending on the industry where you play in, you have laws that relate to your to your industry, to your business. Now, but I've just highlighted the 2 key ones that I know cuts across, irrespective of the sector where we play in. Now, moving on to how to interplay the topic we have at hand. Who is a company secretary? Of course, we know as the statutory officer, the coordinator, we are administrators of the company. And of course, the office of the company secretary is a unique position and is significant because it's at the heart of the organization's administration and operations. Now, the CAMA 2020 that we have now provides that every company, excluding a small company, must have a company secretary. And as company secretary, we play a crucial role in maintaining the company's seamless administration. And in this role, we advise and of course, we guide the board of directors. And we are We are governance advisors. We are advisors to the board. And as company secretary, we are portrayed as the governance officer in the principles of corporate governance. And we have the responsibility of ensuring that our organizations have proper understanding and full adherence to the principles of corporate governance. And in summary, I summarized those principles of corporate governance earlier. Also, as company secretary, you're responsible for complying with rules and regulations that pertain to your business. However, I'm going to put a caveat on this because I'm sure someone will be asking me, what about the compliance officer? So as we move on, there's a slide where I talk about the role of company secretary, the various types of in-house counsels that we have, and how there can be an interplay in what we do. Now, this is regulatory compliance and how to view it. Now, for regulatory compliance, how to view it, I have it here in 5 buckets. Now, the first bucket is basically what concerns us as company secretary, and depending on how your organization is structured or how the organization that you service is structured, you may actually be involved in all 5. Now, for the first one, I have corporate compliance requirements. And this is where you have things that have to do with CAMA-related compliance requirements. You have your annual returns that need to be filed as and when due. You have the changes. It can be changes to your board, maybe appointment of directors, resignation of directors, removal of directors, appointments of secretaries, change of registered address and the like. You have dividend declarations and payments, things around shares. Well, before now, we used to have transfer of shares, but the CAC has now discarded with that process, and they are now requesting that shares need to be surrendered back to the company and reallocated to new shareholders. Then, of course, you have proxies or registration, things that has to do with FRC, and maybe you are registering your directors, you are registering members of your audit committee in line with the FRCN Act and the NCCG code, of course. So the first bucket is the corporate compliance requirement. And as company secretary, irrespective of who is appointed to handle all the others in bucket 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? You have a responsibility of handling things in the corporate compliance requirement bucket, because this is basically things that sit within CAMA, and things that sit within CAMA 2020 will be within the purview and responsibility of the company secretary. Now, the second one, regulatory compliance, how to view it, as I put it in the second bucket, is HR-related compliance requirements. And this is where you have things around payee, pension, NSITF, your ETF fund itself, ITF, etc. Then the third is finance, tax, and data protection related compliance requirements. There may be an overlap here depending on how your organization is structured or how the organization that you service as an external company secretary is structured. You may find yourself as having to provide service in this space as well. So for finance, tax, and data protection related compliance requirements, that is, of course, where you have a CIT, which is basically the company's income tax. There's a WHT on directors' fees, the directors' fee that is paid annually, depending on what you have in the organization. The rates based on the Finance Act is 10%. Then there's a VAT. There's also the common reporting standard, which is something that came to be in 2020, and then there's the data protection requirement depending on the kind of data interface that your organization has. Then the fourth bucket, industry-specific compliance requirements. And under this bucket, of course, you have maybe SEC requirements. For example, if you're a capital market operator, take for example, you're an asset management company, you are an issuing house, you're a trustee, or you are a broker dealer, I can imagine that your compliance calendar, if you are using a Microsoft Word document, would be about 25-page or 30-page document, right? Because you have daily returns, you have weekly returns, you have monthly returns, you have quarterly returns, half-yearly returns, and of course, yearly returns. Again, if you're in pension industry, you have PENCOM-related filings that you need to make as and when due. APCON will be for advertising, CBN will be for central bank, and of course, if you're in the oil and gas space or just strictly power, you have the relevant regulatory requirements as well. So in this fourth bucket, how to view regulatory compliance is to put them in different buckets. So this fourth one is talking about industry-specific compliance requirement. Then the last one, which should not be even taken with levity at all, is where I call others. I was trying to get a name to give them, but I just said, let me just start with others. And this is where you have licenses, you have permits, you have dues, levies. For example, FRCN levies. If the organization is a public company, you know you have FRCN levies you need to pay based on annual turnover of the organization. If there are subscriptions, maybe for your directors. Of course, in terms of levies, you also have levies for your directors as well that need to be paid. And then there's fidelity bond, and this is, for example, if you are a capital market operator, and I'm sure you know there's the fidelity bond that needs to be done and the proof filed with the SEC on or before 31st December of every year. So looking at regulatory compliance, this is how I view it, and this is how I encourage people to view it as well. Corporate compliance requirements, which is heavily on the shoulder of the company secretary. HR-related compliance requirements, again, depending on how your organization is structured, also depending on your role as company secretary. Where I currently work, legal compliance and company secretarial is one department as a whole. So we handle all of this. Of course, we interface with other stakeholders within the organization to get their inputs and to also nudge them, remind them on the filings and when they need to make those filings as well. There's also the finance, tax, and data protection related compliance requirements, industry-specific compliance, and others. So if you can view your regulatory compliance in this 5 buckets, I think you're able to at least demystify any complexity that you have, and you're able to focus on working on each one of them and getting them done as quickly as possible. So the next slide, which is role of company secretary, and I said various types of in-house counsel. So just 3 buckets really. You have the legal advisor, general counsel, you have the company secretary, and you have compliance officer. So I'm going to tie this back to this slide. So if in your organization, right, you are a company secretary, of course, the first bucket, this corporate compliance requirements with basically your responsibility. If you're legal advisor, general counsel, and you have nothing to do with maybe company secretarial type of work, it's still advisable that you keep an eye on it, because at the end of the day, if there's any default and it relates to penalty or sanctions and you appearing before a regulator, it's still your responsibility as a legal advisor or general counsel to make adequate representation for your organization. So you, of course, and you have compliance officers. So these are the various types of in-house counsel that we have. And in some instances, as we know it, these 3 roles or these individual roles, depending on how you view it, they are also outsourced in some organizations. They can be outsourced in firms. You have different firms now that provide external company secretarial services. So if they outsource, is to be sure that all these, they have it clearly spelled out, and they are able to provide the relevant service and compliance requirement service as required. Now going into the role of company secretary per se, yes, as company secretary, is our role to ensure that the board and management adhere strictly to relevant regulations. Now, going back to this last slide, you need to know where your job stops. And if it's okay if you really want to take everything on board, there's no harm putting a lot on your plate. It just increases your capacity. You're able to develop more. And in increasing your capacity, it also helps in career projection or progression, and also how you grow in the organization. So as company secretary, it's your responsibility to ensure that the board and management adhere strictly to relevant regulations. And what I advise company secretary is, you don't have to force it. Just make sure that the relevant regulations that you need to add to comply with as an organization, they are clear, and you advise board and management appropriately. Although for me, I prefer that compliance should be from the top. The tone at the top is very important. If the board is the chairman of the board, if the directors, if it's GMD or MD or the CEO, whatever nomenclature you have, if your EDs, if they are on board, if you know that, oh, we need to comply because as an organization, it is priority for us, it even makes your work easier as a compliance officer, as a company secretary, or even as a legal advisor or general counsel. So it's your responsibility as a company secretary to ensure that the board and management adhere strictly to relevant regulations, ensure that you intimate them, you inform them of the existence of these rules and regulations that you need to comply with, and that process of informing them is documented. So it is not, so that when there's an issue, it's not said that the co-sec did not inform the board. Then also as company secretary, a key role is to develop policies based on rules and regulations advised by the company's regulator. So depending on the regulator, right, the industry where you play in, you need to put in place rules and regulations that will align with them. And if you go back to my first slide where I talked about compliance, I said I see it in two ways: compliance with external rules and regulations that guide the business, and of course, compliance with the internal rules and regulations that you as an organization have developed to guide your business. And oftentimes, these internal rules and regulations, they are mirroring what your regulator has put in place. Now, take, for example, things around gender diversity. There are things you will find in the SEC Code of Corporate Governance or public companies. It's also something you will find in the NCCU Code, right? So if you are developing your own board charter, right, you need to be able to mirror these rules and regulations that your regulators have advised into your own internal document. So that is the role of the company secretary. If this role is outsourced, is to also ensure that, yes, as you as an outsourced counsel or company secretary, you are providing this service to the organization as well. Then, as a company secretary, you also have the role of advising the board. Like I said, we are advisor to the board, right? It is not her responsibility to force it down on them. I can tell us as to ways to get your board to agree with you on things. Let me give a tip on this. So a tip of how to do is maybe when you are having training that is specifically for your directors, the facilitator that you are bringing on board, right? You can tell the person up front, look, I'm having this issue with my director. They don't believe in this. They don't believe in that. They don't believe in doing this, right? Can you help me include about 2 to 4 slides on this and give practical examples? You will have prepared your trainer ahead of time so that when this person is, when your directors are probably hearing from another party, right, from a training, they can possibly take it on board, but they can possibly take it on board and take it more seriously, more than familiar faces. And that's sort of the challenge that comes with being too familiar with your board. Yes, it's good to be familiar, but then it's also good to be firm and be a thorough advisor. Now, you advise the board on directors on regulatory compliance and of course other compliance issues. As we progress, like I said at the end of this training, I intend to share with members of this, everyone on this call, compliance calendar that I currently use, which is a template, and of course compliance reports to the board or to your management that you can also make use of. And of course, you make routine reports to your management and of course to the board of directors on quarterly basis, depending on how frequently you have your board meeting. Now, also as company secretary, it's your responsibility to ensure that the company's actions comply with the laws that govern the company's operation. So as a company secretary, you must guarantee that the provision of CAMA 2020 and other laws governing the activities of the company are adhered to. Of course, you need to let your directors know that, of course, CAMA 2004 is now a thing of the past. We now have CAMA 2020 and advise them as a relevant rules and regulation as it pertains to any specific issue that you are dealing with. All right. So looking at the role of company secretary, now we are moving into the half of it. I've put them in different heading. So number one, in terms of regulatory compliance, again, going back to our topic, understanding the role of company secretary in regulatory compliance, practical tips, key legislation, then practical tips for timely compliance. Now, number one, as company secretary, we have the role of ensuring compliance with corporate governance regulations and best practices. Now, for this one, for you to ensure compliance, of course, as company secretary, you have to be familiar with the provisions of the various corporate governance laws, regulations, and best practices applicable to your company and, of course, the industry where you play in. And in doing this, you need to have a robust governance framework, your board structure, composition, directors' appointment procedures, their duties and responsibilities, their remuneration and performance, things around risk governance and internal control, and of course, you need to have governance documentation in place, your board charters, your board committees, terms of reference, the appointment procedures also need to be in place, sustainability policy, diversity policy. Now, the approach I take in terms of governance documentation so that I don't have scattered documents all over the place is that my board charter is actually bulky. And the reason why it is bulky is because all these subtle, small policies, I've embedded them in a single document. And so that when my internal auditor or external auditor or external consultant, board evaluator comes around and they request, oh, can we see your diversity policy? I'm just able to say it is embedded in my board charter and you can refer to page so. I feel like it is harder to have it that way as opposed to having like 10, 11 corporate governance policies all over the place. Again, this is what has worked for me, and I'm happy to hear from my colleagues on this call what has worked for you as well in terms of your governance documentation. So in terms of regulatory compliance and role of company secretary, speaking on the corporate compliance requirement, number one is to ensure compliance with corporate governance regulations and best practice. Ensure you have got a robust governance framework in place and governance documentation. I'm sure somebody will ask me, oh, this is looking like something for Guinness PLC, for the banks or for the PLCs. Not necessarily, even as private companies, right? Depending on your organization, you can have all of this in place. Again, you don't need to have something so robust like a 50, 100-page board charter. You just need to tailor them to at the minimum meet up with the best practice, minimum requirement for some of these things and have them in place. There's no one-size-fits-all for governance documentation. I think it's very important to mention that there's no one-size-fits-all. You need to understand your company, the structure that you have. Is it an owner-based company, an owner-controlled company? I'm sure you understand what I mean by an owner-controlled, or is it owned by the public, purely public? So understand that, and of course, tailor whatever it is you want to have for your organization in place along those lines. Now, role number 2 is filing of regulatory returns. And as it relates to company secretary, of course, you have your corporate governance compliance returns to SEC via PLC, and this is, of course, due on 31st January. And for something that is still due on 31st January, when we get to practical tips, I'm going to mention this. For something that is due on 31st January, I don't think it is right to commence the process of preparing this in January. You should actually start by end of October or at the end of November so that you start, and by 31st August or 31st December, you are in a position to say, I am ready to file, and you can have a second, a third, a fourth, and even a fifth eye to look at that policy, to look at your return for you, because you want to be sure that for filing, it's not just a box ticking exercise. You're actually filing accurate, complete reports with your regulator. Now, still on filing of regulatory report returns, you have the corporate governance compliance return to the FRC due 31st March. I know for this year, we've had like about 2 or 3 extensions from the FRC because they have a new platform, which is the board admin platform that they are using. Again, it's to confirm is your organization as that you service as COSEC. Are you required to render returns to the FRC? If yes, please ensure you file the returns as and when due. And now it is no longer manual. You don't need to complete that form manually. It's done electronically. And when it's done electronically, ensure you send it to the internal persons that need to approve, your board committee chair or your chairman himself that need to approve, or your MD as well. So this thing should be done as and when due. This is for the company secretary as it relates to filing of regulatory returns for corporate compliance. Again, emphasis on corporate compliance. There are other regulatory compliance buckets like HR, finance, tax, data protection, and all that. Now, role of company secretary in regulatory compliance. Point number 3 is on development of policies. And I touched on this, but I will expatiate more now. Now, you need to develop policies in line with applicable regulations. And it's not just enough that, oh, we have a board charter. You need to communicate and train. So in my organization, this is what I do. When we develop a policy, any policy at all, whether it is director-related policy, whether it is employee-related policy, we communicate. Immediately after our board meeting, after that policy has been approved by the board, we just do dear or this is to inform you that the board at a meeting held on XYZ Day 2002 has approved this policy. A summary of this policy is listed below 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The owner of this policy is the company secretary, or the owner of this policy is head risk internal control, depending on who owns the policy. It's not enough to develop policy. You need to communicate and you also need to train. Now for training, this is what works for us in my organization. We do like newsletter, like a one-pager newsletter, put pictures here and there. It will not be too wordy, because if it's too wordy, you know, it throws people off and our attention span can be very low, right? So we communicate that the policy is even in place. Now, if it's an existing policy that was revised, right? If it's an existing policy that was revised, so what we do is to basically let them know, oh, therefore, please be informed that this policy which you currently have in place has not been revised by the board. Please see below the changes made by the board. Maybe before it used to be A, B, C. Now it is now X, Y, Z. So we let them know this is the change that we made. You can also tell them this is the rationale for the change, and this is why the changes have been made, and this is what they should know. So you develop policy in line with applicable regulations, you communicate and train, and of course, you ensure that those policies are generally available so that it's not a case of I'm not aware. Now, for the ones relating to directors, right? I don't know if your organization, if you have like a portal that you use for your board, is to ensure that it's available where they can get it. Oh, not that they'll be calling you on Sundays or Saturdays to say, oh, Madam Company Secretary, I'm trying to get her board charter, and you have to send their email. So if you have a portal, like a board management software, we have one, it's called Boardable. That's what I use in my organization. You can host them in the document section, so it's generally available. If you don't have that, it's okay. You can have a drive, either Google Drive or Outlook Drive. You can get your IT team or any IT expert to help develop something where you can house those things. Just ensure that they are safely secured and it's not just anybody that can have access to them. Take, for example, a board remuneration policy. You don't just want it to fly you all over the place for anybody to see. Let's remember, as company secretary, we have to be discreet. One thing I notice is that as company secretary, people come around us often because you know that we have information, we have access to information. They want to befriend us because they know we have information and get ideas as to what was discussed at the meeting. One very key soft skill that we require, apart from emotional intelligence and tact, is being discreet, and this is very important. So on generally available policy, anywhere we are keeping our policies or documents related to the board, let's ensure, even in this age and era of virtual world, everything virtual, let's ensure that they are safely secured, they are stored properly, we have password, they are encrypted, and we are sure that it's not just all over the place for people to download. Also, we should have policy management register, and of course, policy acknowledgement. For example, if you have like a code of conduct, right? We have like a code of conduct for directors. You can have this policy acknowledgement bit. Are we sure that they are acknowledging? Are they acknowledging that they've read that policy, the code of conduct? Also, the annual declaration form. Let's say at the end of the year, you have something like conflict of interest, and you need to acknowledge that they've gone through this conflict of interest document, and they acknowledge that the information they are provided is true, right? So all those documents, there need to be like an acknowledgement, and we have to keep and maintain them properly. All right, okay. So the next point after this is training of board and management, and of course, board evaluation. That is the role and responsibility of the company secretary. Now, for that, training calendar needs to be developed, and the training calendar needs to be developed prior year. Just make sure you develop before time. Make sure they are relevant to the needs of your directors. They are relevant to the needs of the board, right? They are relevant to what your directors need and the deficiency you've identified and you want to rectify, right? So they need to be developed easy. The training that you have in mind, is it quarterly or is it monthly? Although if you say you want to train your directors monthly, it might be an overkill. If they sit on another board, it might be difficult for you to get dates for them to. So, I mean, for me, it's 4 times a year. 2 can be around corporate governance, 2 will be around our industry, which is the financial service space, something related to capital market space, right? So training calendar should be developed before. And again, you can look at the prior board evaluation report of your director. If it's a new company or if you've not gone on board evaluation, or if you've not done board evaluation before, you can, based on your interaction with the board at different meetings, areas where you think, oh, this area they are deficient in this, maybe you can just put it on the calendar. And there are different places you can check. You can check ICSAN. I check ICSAN a lot. I check IOD Institute of Directors. They're having a training July 14. I'm already scheduling about 18 of my directors across the group for that that training. So you look at those sets. You can have ICSAN, you can have Institute of Directors, there's DCSL, there's Lagos Business Schools, there's SEG, and that's the Society for Corporate Governance in Nigeria. Just check online, you can see all those good places, and you can see quite a number of experienced professionals as well in the market, right? They have experience that can share with your directors, right? So just develop the calendar based on that. And of course, NCCG allows for externally facilitated evaluation once in 3 years. Just ensure that internally you do your own annually. Okay, so then still on role of company secretary, agenda and minutes in regulatory compliance, ensure that you have proper headings for your agenda, and of course for your minutes. You have to be proactive in developing all of these things. High quality minutes, very important. There's no skill to it, no typos, free from ambiguity. You adequately capture deliberation and resolution. Of course, use active, not passive tense. Now, on minutes, right? This is going to be largely dependent on 2 things. It's going to be largely dependent on your chairman, depending on the kind of chairman you have on your board, his or her writing style, and of course, also dependent largely on your organization. Maybe like if your minutes, for example, goes through your MD, if for first line review, just for him to sign off on it before it goes to your chairman. So it will be largely dependent on your chairman, of course, the body language of your board, how they want this to be written. But of course, there are basic rules as to things that needs to be captured. Things around dissent, except maybe it's a strong dissent and maybe the person wants it written, that is when you need to probably put it down. Now, still on role of company secretary in regulatory compliance, my next point will be on changes in law. As company secretary, one thing we also have responsibility for is legislative tracking, right? And on this legislative tracking, basically depending on the sector where you play in again, and the general ones, you need to be able to go sift through your regulator's website, look at the changes that they are bringing up through their circulars, their memos, any document at all, and of course go through it, look at the changes that they are proposing, how does it affect the organization, and communicate to relevant stakeholders within the organization, to your directors, to your MD, to the relevant board committee, and make the relevant changes. I will touch on that when I get on practical step very shortly. Now, on the processes and systems, ensure they are properly documented. This is a key driver. And the last point under this heading is adequate reporting. As company secretary, in terms of regulatory compliance, you need to report to the board and board committees if you have that in place in your organization. However, if it's just a full board you have, you should also report to them. Now, for board committees, depending on how your organization is structured, you will typically report to like a board risk and audit committee or a board governance committee, maybe like a board audit and governance or a board general purpose, depending on the nomenclature that you have. So anything relating to risk, audit, compliance, we typically go to that committee if you have. However, if you don't have, you can report to the full board. Then there's also to management. Of course, before we move or jump to the board, you need to, of course, discuss internally first. If you have like a group an ESCO committee, you discuss it first, you take it to senior management, and of course you report to your board and board committee. Now this is a reporting template, and on corporate governance report, this is just a template. Corporate governance report for the first quarter ended 31st March 2020, and for example here we're reporting to the governance and nominations committee. And of course, it's coming from legal and compliance, or maybe legal, COSEC and compliance. And this is what it looks like, this reporting template. So for example, I'm looking at NCCG 1, right? NCCG, and it says that it's desirable that most of the nets non-executive directors are independent, right? And our compliance status and our organization is 100%. And in terms of implementation status, you see that I've marked this as green, which means it is good. As implementation status, the update there is that the board at its meeting held on so date appointed Mr. Lagbaja as INED. That means we are compliant. So then the next one, board should promote diversity in membership across variety of attributes and all that. So compliance status, look at that one, we have 0%. And the reason why it's 0% is because we don't have a policy to govern diversity and there are no like measurable objectives. Out of 11 directors, none is female. So that's a red. And for you as COSEC, as company secretary, we are presenting this to your board committee or your full board regularly, and they are seeing this as red, and they begin to say, this is something we need to work on. This is something we need to look into. Should we begin to ask for CVs, competent CVs of females that can be on our board so that we are complying with this as and when due. Now, this is the reporting template for that purpose. Now, we are moving now to practical tips for timely compliance. I haven't touched on the key legislation and of course the role of company secretary. Now we are moving to practical tip. Tip number one, and which has worked and for me and of course some of my other colleagues, is to develop and regularly update. This regularly update is very important. Develop and regularly update a compliance tracker of key operating laws and regulations, including license renewal deadlines and notifying the organization of any changes. So as company secretary, as in-house counsel, or as compliance officer, we need to develop, and the work does not just stop at developing. You have to regularly update, and that is where the work is. Depending on where the industry where you play, that updates is something that needs to happen maybe on a weekly or a monthly, depending on how often your regulator bring up things. So for compliance tracker, it's easy to create, but you need constant updates. If you don't update it, let's just say, oh, I created the compliance calendar in 2020 and I'm still using it today. No, it cannot work. You need to update it on regularly. As soon as you have updates from your regulators, just ensure you update it. So where a new regulation is introduced or there is an amendment to the old, you have to summarize the action points, update your compliance calendar, and of course, you have to communicate that change to the affected units. Let's say, for example, on WAT payable on director's fees, now it's 10%. Let's say from next year now, the federal government just come up and they say they want to increase that to 12.5. Of course, you need to inform your finance team so that when director's fee is paid, maybe after your AGM, they can be sure to deduct the relevant WAT of 12.5. If you still deduct 10%, you are not compliant because you are not in line with reality, with what is real. So having a compliance calendar in place is very key. Developing it is key, and regularly updating it is key. As we progress, I'm going to share more on compliance calendar because it's a game changer. It's a game changer for timely compliance. Next point is to stay abreast of amendment to operating laws, and that will ensure that your organization is able to make quick adjustments to a strategic direction and avoid any potentially negative consequence. Now, FRCM, for example, up until about February or March this year, we were submitting that return manually using a document, but now they have a portal where we need to operate, where we need to submit a return. Imagine if as a company secretary, you are not aware that that is happening. You are still probably sending a manual FRCN template to their office in Ikeja or in Lagos. They will just begin to wonder that this company secretary, is he or she even in tune with reality or anything that is happening? So you need to stay abreast. And what is the practical way to stay abreast? So on my computer, right, every day when I come into the office, I go on Google. First, I open the following tabs. They are permanently open on my system, and every day without fail, I check them. The first is sec.gov.ng. And that is because that is the market where 3 of the subsidiaries where I service, where they play in. CAC.gov.ng is permanently open. FRCN.gov.ng is permanently open. ngx.com is permanently open. cbn.gov.ng, because I have one subsidiary that is a microfinance bank, right? So how do I stay abreast of amendments? I have all these tabs open. and I have the news press release section of that website of my regulator open, so that immediately something comes up, I can just check and pick it up and advise my people internally, and of course make the relevant changes. So it's not like your regulator will bring up something in May, and by December you are just hearing about it. So very important, you have to be on top of it, develop a tracker, and of course update that tracker. I will talk more about tracker as we progress. So moving very quickly so we can take our questions. So the next for practical tip for timely compliance, emphasis on timely compliance. The next tip is to create a system where the deadline before the deadline. So you need to have a deadline or an internal deadline for submitting regulatory compliance report is agreed with internal stakeholders. So if the deadline for submitting FRCN, so for this year, the initial deadline was March, right? The FRCN, the SCCG report was March. Now, when they came up with this portal, they moved it to May. Again, there are challenges and all that, teething problems with the new portal, they moved it again to June, right? So you need to, if the deadline for that report is 31st March, right? I think you should set a deadline of a month, right? A month, which is February, end of February, depending on if it's a leap year or a regular year. So that is the joker for this thing. Practical tip for timely compliance, you need to create and enforce it. Create a system where there's a deadline before the deadline. You need to have an internal deadline for submitting your return, and is agreed with internal stakeholder. If possible, get HR, if you're an internal company secretary, get HR to embed it in people's KPI so they can take ownership. Of course, if you're an external company secretary, you need to take ownership and responsibility for that, because at least it puts you also in good light that your organization that you're servicing is submitting their returns before the deadline. If deadline is 31st, you are not submitting on 31st, 11:59 p.m. I know some people that like submitting. What if the internet fails? Or what if there's an unrest, take for when we had the NSAS problem and you can't get through to your colleagues or something just happened? So have clear days, clear weeks, clear months, so that you are not under pressure. Another reason is you have enough time to review and correct any errors. And the reason why you are doing this is because you want to ensure that only accurate and complete submissions are made. Again, another reason for doing that is you are taking compliance beyond box ticking exercise. You know, some people say compliance, we filed it now. Pardon me, I almost had to speak in my native language. We filed it, and it's not like a box ticking exercise, right? No. Puts your mind into what you're filing. It's not just, oh, we've done this and all that. You have enough time to review and correct any errors so that you are submitting only accurate and complete returns to your regulator. So a key practical tip is to have deadline before the internal deadline before the deadline to your regulator. Now, the next point for practical tip is to identify and address potential compliance loopholes by holding regular internal audits. Now, for regular internal audits, you can do it either yourself or you can get your internal audit team if your organization is that big to do it. So just do like a mock audit just to assess your level of compliance. So you are not waiting for an external auditor to come and tell you this is not complete, this is not this is not that. For me, in fact, when my external auditors come in for review, I want to be able to answer them boldly and say, you're asking for this, I have it. You're asking for that, I have it. So I conduct like a mock regular internal audit for myself, just to be sure all the returns are filed as I when my licenses are reviewed, levies I need to pay for my organization or for my directors are paid. I've paid the relevant WAT. So I have a regular internal audit, like a mock audit, just to assess your own level of compliance. The reason why I'm doing this is because you are being proactive and you are preparing for random inspection or audit by your regulator. Now, if you're in the financial service space, something about inspection or audits by your regulator will not be straight to you. Capital market, SEC does it regularly. CBN can knock on your door. PENCON can knock on your door. I believe they will be the same for our brothers, colleagues in power, oil and gas space where you have DPR. Again, depending on the regulator that you have, I can just knock on your door and say, okay, can I see your file for so. So by holding regular internal audits, you assess your own level of preparedness and seriousness with the work. Now, practical tips for timely compliance. I'm sure someone will wonder at this point, how does it relate? You need to hire, train, and equip the right people. It's not enough to hire people. Imagine if you are hiring somebody that just finished law school, let's say, today is June 24th, right? The person graduated, left law school maybe yesterday, was called to the bar yesterday, right? And you are complaining on Monday that this lady cannot fill SCCG code. How will she be able to pay? So it's not enough to hire. You need to train people. You need to equip people. You need to commit to equipping people and pouring into them so that they know how to do things. This is when you've done that, you have the moral right to say, oh, I have done this. And it's not just something you do like one day, every day, continuously. If you have a team, teach people, train people. And if you are a one-man team, go for training, ask questions, ask colleagues, don't stand alone. I have a slide on that. Don't stay alone. You need community. It's a game changer for me. You need community. You cannot walk alone. Community is a great way to keep a pulse on what is happening in your industry or in your society. Ask questions. Please, how do I file this? Oh, I learned that SCCG has now done this. Please, when is the deadline? If there are WhatsApp groups in your industry, please join. Join those WhatsApp group and don't turn off the notification because you see relevant information, except maybe they are sharing relevant information. As long as they are sharing things that are useful, please join, contribute, get information as well. Community is very important. Company secretary, you cannot work alone. In fact, you see, let me adopt Liverpool's slogan, you cannot work alone. You need to do it with a community. So that if you are in the microfinance bank and you are co-sec of in the microfinance bank, you cannot just be, okay, it's just my office, like Baja Microfinance Bank, and that is the only place I know. You need to relate with other people so that you are not left behind. You are not, things have moved in your organization and maybe you are required to file with a purple document. And because you are alone and you are just alone, you are still using orange documents. So community is very important. I know some of us can be introverted, but you need to just come out a little bit more. So hiring, training, and equipping the right people is very important because you need people to implement your compliance process. And when you have good people, they are the ones that will bring significant cost savings from potential fines and, of course, the saving from reputational damage and all the like. Let me move very quickly. Now, steps to building a compliance program. Very quickly, know your industry, know the industry where you play in, know your regulators, apex regulators, sectoral regulators. Take, for example, capital markets, your apex regulator will be SEC. If you are a broker-dealer, your next regulator, which is an SRO, self-regulatory organization, will be the NGX, commonly known as NSE, that's the Nigerian Stock Exchange, right? So know your industry, know the industry where you play in, advertising, financial services. When people say they're in financial services, I say where specifically? That is big. You have banking, capital market, pension, insurance, and of course we have fintech, right? Which is an interplay between finance and technology. So know your industry, know your regulators. Number 3, know the laws applicable to your business. A good approach to knowing the laws that apply to your business is to prepare a compendium of laws. If you can't do it alone, please outsource to law firm. While I was working at Jackson and Edu, I was there for 6 years. I remember we worked on a project for one of the big FMCG. I'm not going to mention their name for confidentiality purposes. Right, we worked on a compendium of laws for them, and we divided it around make, source, and deliver, which are the 3 channels by which they service the market, right? So in preparing that compendium of law, it was like a 150-page document. We worked on it it was a reward. Like I find it very rewarding because in my current place of work now, I was able to develop something like that. So if you can't do it, please outsource to a law firm. It doesn't necessarily have to be a very big law firm. Just find a budget-friendly law firm that you can use. However, if you have a large team or you have like you on your team, you can throw them into this assignment to do it. Prepare a compendium of laws. Basically, what you're trying to do is to extract a list of statutory regulations, the things you are meant to do, federal, state, local governments, and of course, put them together and just develop them and have them that this is the compendium of law for my organization. Number 4, I already touched on this, but just to amplify a bit more, cultivate the habit of checking your regulators' website at regular intervals. Have them permanently open, bookmark them on your on your tab, on your device. So just cultivate the habit of checking them daily, every other day. I mean, again, depending on your sector. For some sector, you have to check every day. If you're in the financial service, you can't sleep, or you have to check your regulator's website every day. So you check for circulars, new regulations, guidelines and updates, and of course you extract obligations that are applicable to your business. So when new regulation is introduced or there's an amendment to old one, basically what you do is to summarize the action points, you update your compliance calendar or tracker and communicate to affected units. Another way to do it, which is what I have here, is Google Alert is also helpful. If you go on Google Alerts, you can put in some keyword so that maybe something is happening, Department of Petroleum Resources, OPL licensee, OML licensee, just put keywords as it relates to your organization and put it there and let it sync to your email so that you can get notification as to this is what is happening. You can also use this, the NASS website, that's the National Assembly. Unfortunately, that is not being developed properly. It's not being updated regularly so that you can just track laws that have been developed by by the National Assembly. So next point, this is what I talked earlier, stay close to your trade associations, other participants and colleagues in the industry. This is very key, very important. As professionals, even if you're a lawyer, not a lawyer, I think it's very important. Community is a great way to keep a pulse on your industry. Do not isolate yourself, please. Compare notes with other colleagues in the industry. And I call them colleagues in the industry. I know someone will say, I work with bank XYZ, this person work with bank XYZ. They say they are competitors. Well, I don't see it as competition. I see it as cooperators. We are cooperators in the market. You should be able to compare notes. Oh, have you filed this return? Oh, is it the same format we are using? Just compare notes and ask questions. That community is very important. Now, compliance calendar, and I'm going to show the templates next now. Basically, the calendar is a tool that helps you keep track of your company's required filings. And basically what you have in compliance is the frequency of filing, the due dates, the regulatory bodies, mode of filings, and of course other related information. And to stay ahead of the curve with important deadlines and filings, you should have a compliance calendar. And like I said, you have to update it with the emergence of new laws and changes to existing laws guiding regulatory reporting. And steps to building your compliance calendar. You're asking yourself question, what laws does it need to comply with? What reports are to be filed? When are those reports due? What department is responsible for producing the information to be filed? Remember when I talked about how I view compliance, regulatory compliance, and I said corporate compliance requirements, HR related, finance, tax, and all that. So this part, what department is responsible for producing the information to be filed will come under that. Then there is the what are the consequences of non-compliance? You know, somebody will ask, is it not just this? You should be able to tell them it is this per day, per that. And you can also tell them it's not just about fine and penalties, it's also about exception. For me, I don't want to have exception. I don't want to go to the board and say, oh, under my watch, you will pay this penalty and all that. So you need to also state the consequences of non-compliance. If it is monetary, put it in the box so it is clear for everybody to see. Now, this is the compliance calendar I talked about, and I will share after the session. So you have name of reports, frequency, is it daily? SBU to submit. SBU means strategic business units. So is it maybe if you have like subsidiaries, is it asset management that needs to submit? Is it issuing house? Is it this or that? So you need to put that. Your regulatory body, is it CSC? Is it your annual returns? Is it SEC? Is it FRCN? Mode of filing, is it electronic? Is it manual? This is very important. In 2020, in the middle of COVID, a lot of our regulators came up with guidelines, circular saying, in view of this, returns that were previously filed manually should now be filed electronically using this email. So again, if you are in a community or you are checking your regulator's website, you will know whether that has changed post-COVID. Because now, to my mind, we are now post-COVID, right? So mode of filing, how should it be filed? Is it through a portal? FRCN before used to be send it to somebody's name, FOKD at FRCN.gov.ng, but now there's a portal board admin, right, that we use for that. So that should be in the mode of filing. Is it physical? Is it electronic? Is it through a portal? It should be there. Explanatory note on how to file. How do you file? How do you compile? Do you send via email? Do you get supporting documents and all that? Put it there as well. And the reason why you are putting this explanatory note on how to file is because if you operate a team, if you are going on leave as a company secretary, if you are going on leave, you should be able to go on leave properly. With this compliance calendar template, your team members can pick it up and file their return when you're on leave. It's not that you're on leave in Q2 and they are bombarding you with calls that, we want to file FRCNO. How do we go about it? What is the password? What is the username? Where is this? In this explanatory notes, that is if you're internal and you have a team. However, if you're alone, well, it is fine if you're alone. There are times when we work alone as well. So you have the explanatory note on how to file so that another person is also good. If you're leaving an organization and you're doing like an handover note, somebody else can pick this up and there's continuity, right? Then the next, which I talked about, is internal deadline. Now for this thing that is daily, say for example, this return that is daily, let's say the deadline for filing is 5 p.m. Internal deadline should be 1 o'clock, right? If deadline is close of business and you've adopted 5 p.m. as your close of business, let's say you are filing something with FMDQ, your internal deadline should be 1 p.m. Regulator's deadline is 5 p.m. Now, the reason why internal deadline will be 1 p.m. is because so that space of 1 p.m. to like 4:59 p.m., you are beginning to tell them, oh yeah, this thing, please, where's my document, or where's this, where's that, and all that. And if there's an issue, you can escalate, you can resolve as quickly as possible. Now, if something is weekly, if something is to be filed every Wednesday, take for example FTR, that's foreign transaction report for those in the capital market or in the financial service market. I'm sure you know about foreign transaction report. You should put it there that this should be filed this. Now, for annual returns, your annual returns, you should also put it there that I mean AGM or this, I need to file this. If there are some levies for your directors that you need to pay with FRCN, and deadline is maybe January 10th for your directors, you should know by first week in December, because you know December is holiday mode. First week in December, you should start reaching out to your directors to get relevant information, get internal approval to pay. So it's very key to have internal deadline and of course regulators deadline. So this is what a compliance calendar template will look like. Now moving forward, in summary, we are getting to the end of this. Very key, understanding the role of company secretary in regulatory compliance, key legislations, and of course practical tips. A summary for me would be to understand your business, identify your regulators, laws, and internal policies. Identify each business or department compliance function. Determine the best practices and standards to be adopted. Very important to reiterate here that there's no one-size-fits-all. Develop policies and procedures, including corporate code of conduct and ethics. Create a depository of compliance-related materials. Communicate strong culture of compliance. Conduct compliance training for staff awareness, of course, for your directors as well. Conduct review work through risk assessment. Always document the reason for your decisions. Implement relevant corrective actions to track to confirm the effectiveness. Regulatory reporting and manage relationship with regulators. I wish there's another talk on relationship with regulators. I know a lot of us complain about relationship, but there's the how, and there's the how to managing relationships with regulators. Then conduct gap analysis on areas of compliance risk identified. Then, like I said earlier, tone at the top is what instills the organization with a culture of integrity and compliance. So if the tone at the top is very good, I think your work as a company secretary, as an in-house counsel, as a compliance officer, I mean, you are about 60% done. It's just for you to work to the 40% by having your, what I call your lay down processes, your systems in place. Now, conclusion, I'm sure someone is wondering, well, if you don't comply, what happens? You can pay a high price. In addition to the cost of investigating issues, let's say you have an issue with EFCC and you need to engage a senior advocate of Nigeria. I'm sure you know that you need millions of naira for that. Or you need to prepare a defense because you didn't deduct the VAT or your director's fee. You know how much it costs to engage lawyers. You have the expense of repayments. There's also penalties and fines. Of course, you also face bad publicity, degraded reputation, operational restriction, you know, they can lock your office and all of that. Corporate cooperation, increased regulatory scrutiny. So if your regulator is saying that this person is always defaulting, this organization is always defaulting, they'll just beam their light on you and they'll keep coming until they are able to get as much as they can get from you. And of course, in addition, executives, your management, and even you as company secretary, you may find yourself looking at jail time if the offense is so severe. Maybe there's a misstatement or misinformation in one of your returns and something that is criminal in nature. So therefore, establishment of a compliance framework is very critical for every organization. And the reason why it's critical is because you are able to reduce the risk and of course the consequences of non-compliance. And I end this presentation with this quote: the cost of non-compliance is great. Colleagues, if you think compliance is expensive, try non-compliance. And this quote is attributed to former US Deputy Attorney General Paul McNulty. At this end, happy to take question and answer from our participants. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Adetola Fashoro, for that very, very brilliant presentation. In my opinion, it was quite fantastic what you've outlaid, and then a lot of things that you've put forward. And also, thank you for sticking to time. And that for us, we quite applaud it. So I would like us to give her a round of applause. If you can drop on it, just give her a church, will hear it. You can give her a round of applause. We have a few, I think there's a question for you on the chat box. Yes, from Precious Madu Wike. She wanted to know, I believe it's a lady, she wanted to know, she's asking you if you can throw more light on audit exception. I think that came from the slide that has the why comply, prevent, avoid audit exceptions throughout the year. So that's, if you can quickly talk about that.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so on the audit exception, so let me just come to the slide, why comply, prevent, avoid audit exceptions throughout the year. So let me give a case in point. Let's say, for example, you're meant to pay your director sitting fee or sitting allowance rather immediately after the end of the meeting, and maybe through there's a slip or a miscommunication between you and the finance team, that was not done. And it was meant to be, let's say it was meant to, you had a board meeting in November and it was meant to be paid immediately in November, and you omitted and you now paid maybe in January. Now, I will expect the auditors to pick that up, and they will pick it up by saying, we observed that the company secretariat team and the finance team did not pay the director sitting allowance for the meeting held on so November this, and that will carry it over to 20 the following year. That's an exception. We recommend that the company secretariat team and finance team should work harmoniously to ensure this does not happen. As an exception, and it's like a dent. It's like a dent to say in between company secretariat team and finance team, there's miscommunication, there's gap in communication. Basically, exception is something, is like a negative that this was not done, this was not done, this was not done. Is a negative. Every other thing is positive. This was done, this was done, this was not done. So the reason why you want to comply is because you want to prevent as much as possible to the barest minimum as it relates to your department, and of course to encourage other departments as well to avoid audit exceptions throughout the year, either from your internal auditor or from your external auditor.
Thank you very much for that. If you have anybody who has any further question, you can send it to us, and we will gladly forward to Mrs. Fashoro to provide the answers that you seek. At this time, I would like to again thank you, Madam, for this very brilliant presentation. And I'm sure that in fact your presentation has been described as an MBA in regulatory compliance. Those of us that are here are very lucky to be part of these discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
So, yes, thank you very much. So quickly move, for want of time, for our next presentation. I would like to, I'm sure a lot of people would like to take a short break, 2 minutes break, grab a glass of water or a bio break or something, while I introduce our very next speaker, who will be talking on the sub-theme, tools and methods to successfully structure and manage an effective compliance function. This should be an icing on the cake. This is where the doing will happen. So I'm going to introduce to you our very next speaker. Our very next speaker is Mr. Onyekachi Uko. Mr. Onyekachi Uko, FCIS, is a graduate of the University of Benin, Benin City, Edo State, where he bagged his LLB honors in 1987. He was called to the Nigerian bar and he was elected fellow of the Institute of Charter Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria in 2008. He has served on the Conference and AGM Planning Committee and the Law Reform Committee of the Institute for 2 terms of 2 years each. He is currently serving on the Finance and General Purpose Committee of the Institute in the 2nd term now. He has served as one of the examiners of the Institute's professional examinations. He was a former financial secretary of the Lagos State chapter of the Institute and is the immediate past chairman of the editorial committee of the flagship magazine of the Institute. He has been in private professional practice in the fields of legal and corporate governance, but he has had a stint with Footwear and Accessories Manufacturing and Distribution PLC, formerly Better Nigeria Limited, Ojota Lagos, as Corporate Affairs, Human Resources, and Admin Advisor from the period July 2008 to September 2009. He is now the principal of OCU Professional Services firm of corporate governance practitioners situated in Surulere, Lagos. He is married with children. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. Onyekachi Uko. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. Let me start by saying I'm most flattered. I say thank you to Mrs. Selin Okoroma, the chapter chairperson. Thank you to my co-speaker, Mrs. Adele Fashoron. That was a very brilliant presentation. I would have said perhaps we should close to give you both a thanks and go, because you have done virtually justice to every aspect of the topic. But all the same, since I'm here, I have to do my bit. I really appreciate the introduction, but the danger in the giving so flat introduction, it makes the seat very hot. But with that, I know God will help us. Thank you so much. Saying that, I now want to share my paper. All right, please confirm if you can see my paper on the screen now.
I can see. I can see it. I'm sure we can see it.
All right. Yes, I'm to speak on the sub-team tools and methods to successfully structure and manage an effective compliance function. But before doing that, we need to lay some basic background, give some background information. I know my co-speaker have done a lot in that aspect, but at the same time, it will be better if I say some things before going to the sub-team. All right. Regulatory compliance is a major pillar of corporate governance, which our institute is a custodian. Corporate governance in a nutshell refers to adherence to rules, regulations, policies, and practices in the direction and management of an entity. So you can see from the above definition that regulatory compliance is a major pillar of corporate governance. So as corporate governance practitioners, we must be conversant with matters of regulatory compliance and the regulatory framework of compliance in Nigeria, and the tools and methods to successfully structure and manage this function. Compliance will vary from industry to industry. However, in this paper, we'll pay more attention to the acts, code, and regulations that apply industry-wide, particularly the CAMA 2020 and the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance 2018. We should note here that the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance 2018 was enacted pursuant to the Financial Reporting Council Act of 2011. And the purpose was to create a single code that will apply to both the public and private sectors of the economy. So in a nutshell, it is a merger of the principles in the various codes in the sectors. So it's a merger of the codes that were before in the telecommunications, in the banks, discount houses, public companies, insurance, and pension fund administrators. So we now have one single code that every sector can rely upon. From the guidance issued by the Financial Reporting Council, who are to monitor the code through the sectoral regulators that are also empowered to apply sanctions for any deviation notice. The existing sectoral codes are to be withdrawn, but because it is noted that it is not every issue that is covered in the Code of Public Companies of 2018, the sectoral regulators are required to issue sectoral guidelines on any requirements relevant to the sector which are not covered under the code. In my lecture, in my paper, I also make references to circulars and other relevant rules of Nigerian Exchange Limited as the need arises. Let's ask this question: what is regulatory compliance? When we speak of compliance in general, we mean conforming to a rule, such as specification, policy, standard, or law. Regulatory compliance can therefore be when a business follows state, federal, and international laws and regulations relevant to its operations. Then why do we need to comply? My co-speaker has said some things on that. Let me also add by saying this. There are many reasons for regulatory compliance, and some of them can be itemized as follows. It is required by law that businesses must comply with all relevant laws and regulations. It is to avoid infractions and sanctions from the regulatory agencies. It is to avoid negative exposure. It's also to avoid unnecessary litigation, to generally reduce risk, and it is good corporate governance to be in compliance. In discussing matters of compliance, we need to talk about the company secretary. The old view of the company secretary was that he was a mere servant, clerk, or administrative officer who did what he was told to do and had no power to bind the company. This view is supported by the case of Barnett, Hoas, and Co. and the South London Tramways. It's an 1887 case. It changed sometime in 1971 in the case of Panorama Developments Guildford Limited versus Fidelis, where the court held that the times have changed and the company secretary is no longer a mere clerk. In the Nigerian cases of Wimpy and Balogun 1986, which the case and it's part of the management of the company and Allied Matters Act. Provides that except for small companies, every company shall have a company of million or less, 120 million or less. Most companies in Nigeria of CAMA 2020 requires the secretary of a company must be any of the following: a member of ICSAN, a legal practitioner, or a member of a recognized accounting body in Nigeria, or a person who has held office as a company secretary of a public company for at least 3 years of the 5 years preceding his appointment in a public company, or a body corporate or firm consisting of members of A to C above. The Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance 2018, which is applicable across the public and private sectors of Nigeria economy, has it to say on the issue of the company secretary. In Principle 8 of the Code, it states as follows. Principle 8.1, it says, without prejudice to the provisions of the extant laws, the company secretary should be a person with relevant qualifications and competence necessary to effectively discharge the duties of his office. The board should ensure the person appointed has the gravitas and objectivity to provide independent guidance and support at the highest level of decision-making in the company. Principle 8.2 has this to say, where the company secretary is an employee of the company, he should be a member of senior management and should be appointed through a rigorous selection process similar to that of new directors. Principle 8.3 states, the company secretary should be properly empowered by the board to discharge his duties and responsibilities. Principle 8.6 says, it places a lot of duties on the company secretary, which will invariably touch on his position as a driver of regulatory compliance, and some of the duties listed by the principle are, he is to provide the board of directors individually with detailed guidance as to how their responsibilities should be properly discharged in the interest of the company. He should coordinate the induction and training of new directors. He should assist the chairman and MD CEO in coordinating activities regarding the annual board plan and with the administration of other strategic issues at the board level. He should notify the board members of upcoming meetings of the board and this committee, as well as other matters that warrant their attention. He should compile board papers and ensure that the board discussions and decisions are clearly and properly recorded and communicated to the relevant persons in a timely manner. He should provide central source of guidance and advice to the board and the company on matters of ethics, conflict of interest, and good corporate governance. We have taken the pains to go through what is required of the company secretary, so as to show that a lot is required of him in the performance of his duties of regulatory compliance. From the above evaluation of the company secretary and the duties and the entrusted in him by CAMA and the code, one can say that the company secretary is a very strategic and influential senior management employee who is pivotal to the performance relating to issues of regulatory compliance in the company. But unlike the directors of the company, he does not owe fiduciary duties to the company, except where he acts as an agent of the company. Please see section 334 of CAMA 2020. He only acts by the order of the board. Let us look at the responsibility for compliance. Truly, compliance responsibility is actually a matter is a remit of the board. It is the duty of the board to ensure regulatory compliance. Principle 1.3 of the code, that is Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance 2018, states that one of the responsibilities of the board of directors is to ensure compliance with the laws of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and other applicable regulations. However, the company secretary from the divisions and duties discussed above manages statutory and regulatory compliance and the risks associated therewith under delegated authority of the board. In other words, it is the duty of the board to ensure compliance, but that duty is delegated to the company secretary by the board. Now, let us look at briefly some matters that may require compliance. The first one I have on this slide, I have notice of meetings. It is very important that a company secretary must be conversant with the issuance of notice of meetings. He must be familiar with the length of the notice and ensure that persons entitled to receive notices are given this. Section 2 that notice of all type of general meetings shall be 21 days from the date on which the notice is sent out. Please note that the operative word is the word sent out. Section 292 of CAMA 2020 requires that 14 days notice be given of directors meeting, except where the articles provide otherwise. In talking about the importance of notice, I mentioned the case of Longe and First Bank, which was reported in 2010. This case establishes the importance of giving notice and ensuring that persons entitled to notices do get them. This arose from the investment wireless telecommunication company, which went bad. And if that investment was made when a board meeting was issued, and that meeting terminated the appointment of Mr. Longe. But the thing was, at that time, Mr. Longe had been suspended from the board, and notice of the meeting was not given to him. However, that case went from the High Court, where Mr. Longe lost the case. It went to the Appeal Court. He also lost. The bank won. But at the Supreme Court, it held that that decision of the board was unlawful. And the point was that any director entitled to notice of meetings should be given notice of meetings. That was the point that case established. So therefore, as company secretaries or corporate governance practitioners, we want to be sure that when we're giving notices, we comply with all the requirements of the law. As company secretaries, we should also know that a failure to comply with the provision of giving notices can also have dire consequences for the company. You can imagine the fate of the company secretary of the bank at the time that this case was decided. Problems over this issue. Then continue with matters of compliance. Section 417 of CAMA requires that every company makes a return to the Commission at least once every year in the required form. Section 421 of CAMA also requires a return be made within 42 days after the holding of the annual general meeting for the year. Filing of statements in Section 733 of CAMA. That section requires that every banking company, insurance company, or deposit, or provident, or benefit society shall, before it commences business, and also on the first Monday in February and the first Tuesday in August in every year, during which it carries on business, submit to the Commission a statement in the form in the 14th schedule of this act as near thereto as circumstances may admit. Report to the Financial Reporting Council. By paragraph 1, subparagraph 20 of a regulation on the adoption and compliance with the code issued by the Financial Reporting Council, pursuant to section 73 of the Financial Reporting Council Act Public companies shall give a report on the application of the code in their annual reports. And the companies are expected to download the reporting template, complete it, and send to the council within specified timelines as set up by the council. Filing of quarterly reports. All public companies are to file quarterly reports, which are a summary of the company's financial statement for the period, with SEC in the appropriate form. Also, the rules of Nigerian Exchange Limited require the filing of quarterly audited and audited results with Nigerian Exchange Limited no later than 30 days after the end of the quarter. All public companies are also expected to file the audited and unaudited financial statements to the Financial Reporting Council, Nigerian Exchange Limited, and SEC within the time frame provided by the rules of the agencies concerned. Other matters of compliance. Publication of unaudited quarterly results. Under the rulebook of Nigerian Exchange, every listed company, after the filing of its unaudited quarterly results, are to, within 5 business days after the filing, publish in 2 national newspapers and post it on the company's website and send an electronic copy to the publication to the exchange on the same day as the date of the publication. Also, under the rulebook of Nigerian Exchange, all listed companies are to file with the exchange their audit accounts not later than 90 days after the relevant year end and publish it in 2 national newspapers no later than 21 days before the annual general meeting and send an electronic copy of the publication to the exchange on the same day as the date of the publication. We should note here that there are heavy financial penalties imposed for each day of default. Biannual statements of incorporated trustees. Section 845 of CAMA, it requires that biannual statements shall be made up on the 30th of June and 31st day of December each year, and not filed later than 15th of July and 15th January of the following. Completion of release calendar from issuers portal. This form will be completed and filed with Nigerian Exchange by listed companies. Annual certification by CGRS. The Convention on Business Integrity, in conjunction with Nigerian Stock Exchange, establish a corporate governance rating system for all listed companies, which assessment is done yearly by November and December each year, and the filing must be done after the assessment. Filing of half-yearly unclaimed dividend form. This must be filed with SEC by public companies in the appropriate form. Data protection audit filing. Audits are to be done before 15th of March every year for companies who process the data of 2,000 or more data subjects. The filing is to be made to the Nigerian Information Technology Development Agency, that is NITDA, pursuant to the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation 2019. So having gone through regulatory compliance, let me now go to the sub-team, tools and methods to successfully structure and manage an effective compliance function. The first tool I would recommend is that we should assemble relevant materials for legal, regulatory, and corporate governance research. Regulatory compliance, as you can see, is a very tedious and burdensome function, failure of which can attract consequences, including sanctions from regulatory bodies. It is not something that can be done casually. A company should have all relevant acts, regulations, and other materials very handy. During my stay in Farmad PLC, Dembata, Nigeria PLC. I used to have with me Orojo company law. I used to have the Company Allied Matters Act then, and other relevant books, because the whole idea is that as the chief compliance officer, you can be summoned at any time to give advice on any issue, be legal, be regulatory, be it on corporate governance. And it's not the time to start looking for materials. So you should have your materials handy. So when you are summoned, you can give a good advice. The second tool I am recommending is that as company secretary, if a company can afford it, ensure the employment of a compliance officer. This is because the duty to comply is a tedious one, and it could be burdensome on the company secretary, taking into consideration that it is not the only duty it has in the company. So it's advised that a compliance officer be engaged, who will report to the company secretary. And also the research rules also mandates the employment of compliance officer to drive compliance in public companies. They are to report to the company secretary to make the work a lot more easier. My co-speaker has spoken on the issue of compliance calendar. Yes, I align with that tool. It is a very important tool in compliance. The company secretary should keep and develop a compliance calendar which govern compliance in his company. The compliance activities for the year should be identified and shown in this calendar. The period they fall due, and what activity is to be performed to guide compliance. Compliance is not something that can be done offered or an ad hoc basis. That would be a recipe for disaster. I have here on this slide an example of a compliance calendar. This is a calendar being used by one of the blue chip companies we have in Nigeria. Even here, we have made it up to June, but at least it can be, because of space constraints, it can be made up to December. You can see in this calendar, the months are stated in the first column is for months. In the second column, you have details. Details will state what exactly is the compliance function to be done. The next column is the regulatory due dates. Here, the dates where the compliance will be performed will be stated. The next column, you have the frequency. Here, the frequency of the compliance will also be stated, whether it's monthly, yearly, biannually, as the case may be. On the next column, you have the status. The status shows whether there to be stated whether compliance has been done or whether it has not been done, and all that. After that, you now see the columns for the regulators where the compliance will be effected. The first one, you have the Nigerian ICSAN Limited. Second column is for SEC. The other column is for the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria. The other column is for Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission. The next column is for NOTAP. NOTAP is the National Office for Technology Acquisition and Promotion Agency. Then the other one is the NIDA, which I mentioned earlier, and the CAC. So a company secretary should have a compliance calendar that is simple and easy to look. It's not so complex to guide him or to know what exactly is to be complied. It can be in a soft copy. It can be a soft copy. It can be a physical copy that can be pasted where you could easily see it. So you can use it to monitor compliance and drive compliance. The next tool I will recommend is joining professional network of other professionals. As company secretaries, it is not everything that one will know as a law or regulations can change at any time. A support group, and they also have hotlines that members can reach if they have issues, be it compliance. They can call those hotlines for guidance on what to do. The next tool I recommend is self-improvement and capacity building. A company secretary, even though a very busy person, should endeavor to attend workshops and training, both locally and international. This will help him to hone his skills and also be relevant, because the laws and rules can keep on changing and must change with the changing times. The next tool I would recommend is that as company secretaries, we should try as much as possible to have a good working relationship with our directors and also with our fellow colleagues in the office. No matter how good the company secretary is at his job, there will always be one error. In saying this, let me share an experience that one of our members had in his duty as when he was appointed the company secretary of a multinational. Before this time, he has been the legal manager of the company. The AGM planning committee called him to ask him to give them the director's fees and allowances approved by the nomination committee, set by the nomination committee, to be submitted at the AGM for approval. In doing this, he forgot that the fees payable to the chairman has been increased by the committee. So the figures that he gave them were the old figures. So the old figures was what was presented to the AGM, and that was what was approved. It was during the time of implementation that this error got to him. And what he did was, he now reached out to the chairman of the nomination committee, and they were able to go and meet the chairman of the board of directors to explain to him this is what has happened. And the chairman of the board of directors said they should not worry, they will find a way to correct the mistake. So what happened was, the chairman of the board was paid the old fees, but at the next AGM, they now presented a resolution and doubled. They got the nomination committee doubled the allowances to pay the chairman, and this was approved at the next AGM. So the chairman was in a way compensated for what he lost. So the point I'm making here is that, assuming he did not have a good working relationship with his fellow colleagues, you can imagine the outcome. It's a type of error that could lead to somebody losing his job. So in essence, it is important that as company secretaries, we should try as much as possible to have a good working relationship. I'm not advocating that we should, some boards are divided, you have camps. I'm not saying that as company secretaries, we should be professional, but also be and develop relationships that we could use in times of crisis. So next slide, I have my references. And next slide, I thank you for this opportunity and look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Mr. Onyekachi Uko, FCIS, for that presentation. You will all agree with me that what you just listened to was 35 years of experience that just got poured out to us there. Please give him a round of applause. You can do that on your chat room, or you can just give him a round of applause, because that was very, very, very insightful. If you have any question, I cannot see any question. Let me see in the chat room. But we have Mr. Oko, thank you again. You kept to time, and we appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
So very much, and that will give us an opportunity to hear perhaps from our speakers, from our participants. If there's anyone who would like to say something, ask a question, you may also, Mrs. Fashoro is also still here. We have some time. If you have a question, if you have not written it on the chat box, please raise your hands, indicate by raising your hands, and then I will give you the audience, please. Okay, let me see. Anybody wants to speak, wants to ask a question, wants to make a comment on any of the issues that have been raised by Mr. Oko in his presentation. Okay, I can't find. So I take it that we have taken what has been said, and we're okay to go. Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much, Mr. Onyekachuko, FCIS, for that presentation again, and thank you to our participants for sitting glued to your seats and taking in all what has been presented to us. At this time, we would like to take a vote of thanks. Again, I give the indulgence to deal with that. I would like to thank our speakers. First of all, Mrs. Adetola Foshiro, we appreciate the time you've taken to put together that MBA in compliance, as we have seen, and also Mr. Oko for that very insightful presentation on your sub team. I want to thank our participants who have signed in, and I'm sure that you've gotten value for the money you've committed to this training. The materials will be sent to you. You will also receive your certificates. I would like to thank the Institute, Rivers State Chapter, members of the committee who have put this together, the Training, Education, and Governance Committee, for the very, very great work that you've put in to bring this training to fruition. I'd also like to thank our chairman, Mrs. Celine Okoroma Vincent, ACIS, for her leadership in ensuring that the Rivers State Chapter becomes a reference in governance training and education. So on behalf of the Institute and the chapter, I thank you all for this. Like I said, for some quick announcements, the training materials will be sent to all of you participants who have signed up for this training. You will get them by email. The chairman has also indicated, feel free to circulate them in your social media platforms, and they are also feel free to apply the tools that you've learned today in your everyday work. If also the calendars have been, templates have been given to you, you work with them. Don't put them on your shelves and let them gather dust. It is for your use to ensure that your work is relevant and that you become more efficient as company secretaries, as compliance officers, as legal advisors in the organizations that you work for. So on behalf of the Institute and the Rivers State chapter, I thank you for this training. I don't know, Madam Chairman, would you like to say a word before we close up the session, if you're still here?
Yes, please. Thank you so much to our very wonderful facilitators. As a matter of fact, my note is filled with so many nuggets. I've been screenshotting all the nuggets and sending across our platforms for all those who have not been able to attend this training. And obviously they've missed a lot. And I have to thank our facilitators, Mrs. Aditola, you were awesome. Mr. Uko, very wonderful, deep, well-researched, and quite practical presentation. And we are so, so grateful at ICSANRivers chapter. We appreciate you all for finding the time to go through this research and delivering quality for the premium that people have gathered to come and listen to. We're grateful. So our dear participants, please don't stay far from the chapter. We're going to have other trainings per quarter. We'll have another training in Q3 and Q4 of this year. So just stay connected with us on our social media platform. If you're following us, ensure that you are part of our activities, and we'll keep sending you updates as the need arises. So thank you so much. Thank you also our moderator, Mr. Sebastian Exton. You've been amazing. Thank you for your wonderful coordination. We appreciate you. So on behalf of ICSANRivers chapter, signing out now. Expect to receive the materials, your training materials, the certificates delivered in your. And then you can also, keep engaging with us on social media. I've shared the social media handles on the chat box. So you can just go and find us, like our pages, follow us, so that you're not lost with all the trainings and other activities we'll be having in the course of the year. So from my end is thank you and goodbye.
All right, thank you everybody, and do have a wonderful, wonderful wet day today. I don't know where you are. It's raining cats and dogs in Port Harcourt. And I also learned it's raining in Lagos. Wherever you are, stay safe and see you next time on this channel.